Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the April board meeting. Chief Constable, you and your senior team are joined today by the Director General of Operations of the National Crime Agency, Steve Brockhouse, and we're very delighted to welcome you to our board meeting today. With the board not being constituted, this is of course the first time since October 2016 that the NCA has been before the board to formally account as required under the Memorandum of Understanding for the operation of the NCA in Northern Ireland. But over the last 2 years, engagement did continue informally, and thanks to the Director General of the NCA for continuing to provide us with performance reports during that period. As a board, we do welcome the supporting benefits that the NCA brings to the work of the PSNI, and it is important that this work is highlighted and subject to scrutiny. So we have plenty of questions for you today. With regard to the policing plan, Chief, we have now published the plan for the 19-20 period. At our meeting yesterday, the board approved the PSNI budget for the year ahead, and we have noted concerns about the budgetary position, and this is an area which will be kept under scrutiny in the time ahead. As a board, we express our deepest sympathies to the families and friends of the 3 young people who lost their lives in the Greenvale Hotel. It's just such a horror, and I know everybody in the board and in PSNI has expressed their deepest sympathy. It is important that all the matters regarding the fateful events that occurred at that hotel are fully and properly investigated. And as the independent investigatory body for police actions, referral to the Ombudsman will ensure that this is the case. So thank you for coming along today, and we're going to move into questions. Chief Constable, unless you want to have any opening remarks, will you?
Just very briefly, Chair, I think it would be remiss of me not to, like you have done, to pass on our sincere condolences to the families of Conor Kelly, Lauren Bullock and Morgan Barnard, the 3 young people who tragically lost their lives in St Patrick's evening in Hookstown, and our sympathies go to them, and I suspect that all of that may be the subject of some questions, so I'm not saying anything other than simply pay our respects and send our condolences to the family and friends of those young people who lost their lives.
Thank you for that. I'm going to give you a little bit of a break and start with the NCA questions. Just been told off. And I wasn't wrong. I thought my voice was loud enough. So we're going to start with NCA, and the first question will be from Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to Steve and the team from the NCA who are with us here today. Particularly interested, Steve, to know about what you consider your greatest successes so far in the work of the NCA here within Northern Ireland, and as we look to the future and see the detail of your annual plan for 2019 and 20, I'd be interested to know how, as you continue to work with the Serious Crimes Task Force or the Paramilitary Task Force, how you see the success with the work that you carry out there being measured. How will we know at the end of 1920 that the aims that you were looking to deliver have actually been delivered? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Doug. So, the role of the NCA is to lead the UK's fight to tackle serious and organised crime. And I think it's important to note that the threats that face the rest of the UK in terms of organised crime are just as applicable to Northern Ireland. And the role of the NCA in Northern Ireland is far wider than the small but important resource that we have based in Belfast. So there are 4,500 people in the National Crime Agency in a variety of roles, all providing support to the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, and I think are having a significant effect in keeping our communities safe. But turning to the work that's taking place physically here, and you asked about what I would regard as our greatest success, I think we have a very strong relationship with the PSNI. Our partners we enjoy working with, and we have a good relationship. The Paramilitary Crime Task Force is a very important part of that, and I think I would want to point towards what we can add to that team by use of some of our specialist resources to take the profits out of crime using the civil recovery and tax teams and expertise we bring to that unit. And in particular, our success in taking significant financial assets, including houses, away from people who cause misery within our communities. I think that makes a real difference. It sends a message, it's a disruptive tool, and it's something that we can bring some unique expertise to. So you asked about going forward and how we would measure our success. I think it is important that we keep a flow of those sort of operations going, and that we continue to keep the pressure on people who decide to wreak havoc or misery within our communities by taking away the profits that in most cases in organised crime are the driver for their activity. Most organised crime is driven by profit. So I think one of the touchstones, one of the tests of the NCA's work here is the value that we can add to removing some of that incentive, removing the criminal finances, and ensuring that crime doesn't pay.
Garrett, thank you. We're just now a matter of days or weeks away from the UK exit from the EU, and obviously all parties to the discussion are determined to keep the border as it is, the external hard borders of the island. That obviously will create some challenges for law enforcement. What role will the NCA play in Brexit preparation with partner agencies, including the PSNI?
So the NCA have a number of roles to play within Brexit planning. One of our roles is to provide a single compelling understanding of the threat posed by organised crime, and in the context of Brexit, how will that threat change? So we are using all of our intelligence gathering tools to try and understand how Brexit will be exploited by organised criminals throughout the UK and beyond. And we are providing a regular flow of that sort of intelligence material to colleagues in PSNI. We also, as an agency, we are the National Bureau for Interpol and Europol, and I run the UK's International Criminality Bureau, which manages a whole range of tools and powers and relationships that allow UK law enforcement to effectively engage with European and international partners, share information, share alerts, ensure that our patrolling officers have the best information to make decisions on the streets. And we lead the efforts to ensure that the tools that we use to do that at the moment can, where possible, be preserved after a Brexit, but where they can't be preserved, that the appropriate alternative systems are in place, that people are trained, and that as much information is possible to allow people to make those good decisions. Policing and law enforcement is largely a matter of cooperation, relationships and information sharing. The risk after Brexit is that our information sharing with partners is not as complete and as smooth as it is now. The role of the NCA has been to work not just with UK law enforcement, PSNI in particular, but also European member states to ensure that we can be as effective as possible after Brexit, whatever that might bring.
Chairman, thank you. Steve, can I ask you a question around the whole issue of human rights compliance? As you probably know, a pillar of establishing a new policing culture in Northern Ireland has been creating a police service that is compliant with human rights and is rooted in ethical values. Very consciously, the NCA, working as a key partner in Northern Ireland, must also be committed to those approaches. Could you possibly share with the board how you're ensuring that that is the case?
Absolutely. We completely share that view on the importance of ethical activity, ethical performance within policing and law enforcement, and particularly in the context of Northern Ireland. So every officer who deploys to Northern Ireland must have completed code of ethics training. I've done it myself. It's a rigorous package, but it's really important. So we are very, very mindful of the importance of that. So that's probably the first point. And the second is a point that says, I expect the highest values and standards from my staff, and if I receive information that they've fallen short of those standards, then we will act. And we have teams dedicated to investigating and researching if those standards have been breached. That's commonplace across law enforcement, but it's a really important part. I'm really conscious, and I've said so in a number of forums, law enforcement relies on respect and cooperation with communities to allow us to be as effective as possible. You can't expect to have that trust and confidence if you don't adhere to the highest standards. And that's what we as the NCA seek to do.
Thank you, Chair, and Steve, you and your colleagues are very welcome to this first board meeting, given the history that we've had to get us to this point. And obviously, in the light of your comments in relation to the challenges in exiting the European Union, and in some respect the limited or the reduced powers that you have in operating in Northern Ireland as opposed to the rest of the United Kingdom, what do you believe is necessary for you and your officers to ensure that you have all, and I use this word in a metaphorical sense, have all the weapons at your disposal to pursue those people who have destroyed lives in Northern Ireland and right across the United Kingdom and continue to this day to be very organised and very sophisticated, but the end result is the catastrophes that we see on the streets in Northern Ireland and across the United Kingdom?
Thank you. So I share the view that serious and organised crime is a very significant threat across the United Kingdom, and it is increasingly complex and diverse. It's enabled by technology, and it is an international enterprise. But despite all of that, it manifests itself in communities, and it manifests itself in violence, in exploitation, in poor role models for our communities. So the role of the NCA is to lead the UK's fight against serious and organised crime. In Northern Ireland, we do that under the general authority that we have with PSNI and Chief Constable Hamilton. And that's really important for us. So if I was to be asked what the most important thing is to allow us to achieve our goal of keeping the public safe, it is that really strong relationship with PSNI. And I'm pleased to report, I've been enrolled for just under a year, but it's become apparent to me that we do have that very strong relationship. That has to be the bedrock of keeping people safe. So I'm confident we've got the right relationships. I'm confident that the National Crime Agency, the whole of the NCA, has and is developing the right skills and capabilities to keep the public safe. We will continue to monitor that because, as has been said before, keeping pace with organised crime in a digital environment is quite a challenge. But I'm confident we have the right powers and relationships, and I think it is important to note that we are operating in Northern Ireland under that general authorisation, taking the fight to criminals today, and we will continue to do so because we recognise the importance it has within communities.
Just to reassure Mr. Storey and members, the NCA's powers in tackling serious organised crime are no different in Northern Ireland than they are elsewhere in the United Kingdom. There are slightly different arrangements around tasking, around my ultimate accountability to you for their activities and behaviour in Northern Ireland, but it's more about governance, oversight, structures, authorities to operate rather than powers to tackle criminality. There's one or two exceptions to that, like unexplained wealth orders, for example, which the NCA would process if we had an assembly, if we had an executive to pass the commencement order in Northern Ireland. So this is a piece of devolved legislation that's sitting in the stack at the Department of Justice waiting for the executive being reformed. But I don't anticipate that would receive much resistance or obstruction from any of the parties. A government would help those who get the commencement order in place, but it's only right on the fringes of things like that because of our current political difficulties that there would be a variance between the actual powers that the NCA hold elsewhere in the UK and here. And I have to say, anything that is under the general authorisation, sometimes we influence each other about how things are done, but the outcome has always been achieved. So we're mindful of community impact assessments and timing and places of arrests and searches and all of that. But there's I echo what Steve said, a very good relationship, very professional, very accountable one that ensures that this works and that helps to keep people safe in this jurisdiction.
Chair, could I just ask for an assessment of the challenges facing communities here in Northern Ireland in relation to the availability, it appears to be the increased availability of heroin and cocaine on our streets. So what priority that's been given to by yourselves?
Absolutely. So, Class A drugs, cocaine, heroin, are a significant threat to the UK as a whole, as they are in Northern Ireland. It is notable, I think, that production of those drugs overseas is increasing. We've seen notable increases this year in source countries. And we see that the drugs trade does manifest itself in our communities in terms of deaths of users of drugs and the violence that accompanies drug markets, because of course the drug market is based on profit, and profit can be an incentive to violence. So it is a significant threat. It is important to note that, it may be self-evident, Northern Ireland is not a producing country of heroin and cocaine. So the market in Northern Ireland relies on flows of those commodities through the rest of the UK in many cases and through near Europe. So it's really important that the NCA is able to operate overseas and across the UK to protect the people of Northern Ireland from that threat. It is something that forms a significant proportion of our workload. There are live operations ongoing as we speak to tackle that particular threat into Northern Ireland. And we will continue to do so because we recognise the harm that it causes in communities. The point I want to make, though, is that policing and law enforcement alone will not solve that challenge. There are increasing numbers of quantities of seizures of cocaine and heroin approaching the UK, either at the border or on the high seas where our intelligence allows us to make interdictions. But actually, the availability of drugs and the price of those drugs doesn't seem to be impacted upon by that work. I think as a professional it's hugely important to continue that work, to continue the fight to stem the supply of drugs. But that in itself will not solve the problems caused by a violent drug market. And I think it is important to ensure that collectively we all focus upon the need to reduce the demand for those drugs as well, which will ultimately be key to reducing the violence in the market.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that. I would be invited to PSNI questions. We'll sit back and listen. So the first question is from Dillon.
Thank you. Just wanted to ask the Chief Constable question in relation to, obviously, and as it has already been highlighted at the beginning of the meeting, around the deaths of 3 young people at the Greenvale Hotel. And obviously this is a massive investigation in terms of the numbers of witnesses, and I think we talked about something like up to 800 witnesses, including the first responders. So I would imagine it's probably unprecedented in terms of the scale of the witnesses. So there'll be a lot of learning, and I suppose I would just like to know in terms of what has been learned to date, have there been any changes made in terms of how you are behaving towards the investigation by what has been learned? And just, this may or may not be something that you can answer, are there any other bodies carrying out any types of investigation? Because I think the learning will be for much wider than just the PSNI. The learning will be for every single level that is involved in what has happened in Greenvale in terms of the public, community responsibility, council and licensing and all of that. So are there any other investigations in terms of even health and safety that you're aware of?
Well, there will be. What I don't want to do is compromise or jeopardise the criminal investigation that we're responsible for. I think you're right around learning. Something as big as this, as complex, as chaotic, frankly, on the night, there will always be things that first responders can look at and to identify how things might be done differently or better. Members will be aware, because it's been widely publicised, that the Deputy Chief Constable on my behalf referred the initial police response to the Police Ombudsman. I want to be very clear publicly that that is because we felt in public interest that there were questions that needed answered, and those questions should be proposed by an independent accountability body rather than us satisfying ourselves. That is largely out of public interest and confidence in policing, rather than us jumping to any conclusion about misconduct by those initial responding officers. We've nothing to suggest that they did anything other than act in good faith in very difficult circumstances. But there are questions there. So in terms of your question about learning, we've shown an openness to accountability and openness to review our actions organisationally and right down to individual level. Clearly there has been a lot of public commentary as well regarding a person who identified himself as having been detained by the police on a manslaughter suspicion, and then was subsequently arrested in relation to suspicion of possession of drugs with intent to supply, and then de-arrested. And that did not look good in terms of the speed with which we put out a public statement, and then having to follow that up with a second public statement. It's regrettable that it took the attention away from the investigation for a few days, certainly in the public consciousness. There's 3 young people who've tragically lost their lives. There are families that are ruined, that are wrecked with grief. There are young people who have suffered the trauma of witnessing the loss of their friends. So for me, that distraction regarding the drugs arrest and de-arrest was exactly that. That said, for the avoidance of doubt, the officers who carried out the arrest did so on the basis of having that reasonable suspicion required. We feel that that was all done appropriately, and we certainly would not have been putting out the identity of anybody who'd been arrested prior to charge or appearance in court. So we need to just keep these things in perspective. There is a willingness on our part to look and to learn and to improve. That's what a healthy organisation does. We have dealt with any glitches in this investigation, I think, in a very transparent and a proactive way. That's the sort of organisation that I want to lead and this team wants to lead. So I'm sure there will be learning. We will be doing things like a review when we get to the 20-day point on this investigation, and there will be ongoing peer support challenge and all sorts of mechanisms to ensure the quality of the investigation is where we want it to be, and to identify early if there's anything that's been missed so that we can put fixes and mitigations in place. So I think it's a healthy, open approach we have to such a tragic case. I think you're right, other people right across who have responsibilities for licensing and health and safety and so on will have their own obligations to fulfill around what actions they need to take, and will have their own reflections and reviews to conduct. We will work in partnership with people where it's appropriate to do all of that, but actually the organisation that I'm responsible for, I'm confident is competent in this matter. I think the investigation team and local police have done a good job, not to be self-congratulatory in such tragic circumstances, but I've got a high level of confidence in the ability and the competence of the investigators and the local police commanders, all of that. But it is a human endeavour, and sometimes judgments are not quite right, and sometimes things can be done differently. We're open to look at that, to accept it, to acknowledge it, to be held to account, to learn from it, and to get better.
Thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, the question's basically around police engagement with the community. In the past number of months, dissident groups have targeted schools and youth organisations who have engaged and are continuing to engage with the PSNI. Now, I refer particularly to the Londonderry area in this case. Yesterday, the Education Authority sponsored event in the Guildhall had to be cancelled due to the threat of a protest from a dissident Republican grouping. We're continually told about micro groups who have no support, yet we see yesterday that they've been able to put off a significant event for young people and to prevent them from having an opportunity not only to engage with the PSNI, but to engage with other stakeholders who have an influence in their lives. At a time also when report after report tells us of the importance of PSNI engagement with the community and that visibility piece as well. What else can be done to ensure that communities can have the opportunity to engage with the PSNI, but that those groupings are not allowed to hold our communities back, and that there are no-go areas for the PSNI within our society?
Well, I'll perhaps ask Mark Hamilton in a moment to comment on specifics of the event at the Guildhall. All I'll say is I think it was a shame that the event, the decision was taken to cancel. I can understand why organisers would come to that conclusion. In terms of the responsibility to prevent such pressure being brought to bear, where that becomes a policing matter, we will deal with it as such. But I think there's something about society and communities and cities standing together and speaking with one voice. And actually we saw this in Londonderry back in January when there was the bomb at the courthouse in Bishop Street, where the entire, almost spontaneously, and not even at our request or political leaders' request, spontaneously civic, business, political, religious, policing leadership all stood and condemned that with one voice. And I think that stands in stark contrast to what we saw yesterday with pressure being brought to bear. And this wasn't some sort of a cosy event in the Guildhall, by the way. This was actually us voluntarily making ourselves available and accountable and answerable to young people in the city about our use of stop search powers, about our style and manner with which we search houses when we're doing so-called raids. Not language that I would use, but that's what's been reported back to me. So this wasn't some sort of cosy tea and biscuits event. The cops with young people who already had confidence in policing. This was harder age, young people who had their concerns about policing coming to challenge their local police about how they conducted themselves. And I'm sure my officers would have been able to get a fine account of themselves and to explain what they do and why they do it and learn if need be, back to the earlier point. But actually I think it's disgraceful that this group was able to exercise enough influence, pressure to have the event pulled. I don't know, Mark, if there's further comment that you need to make from a local policing perspective on it.
Well, to sort of echo the chief, I think this was an act of desperation by the group who tried to prevent this. They are a small group. We know they're not representative of the people of Derry and Londonderry, and this was just an attempt to intimidate young people from engaging with the police service who are there to protect them on all sorts of issues, not just stop and search, but domestic violence, child sexual exploitation, drugs, bullying, all sorts of things that affect normal families every day of the week. And the people who try to intimidate people to do this are trying to stop that happening. They have no interest in the community safety of the young people in that community or any community. Now, what can we do? Well, we will vigorously support anybody who wants to engage in any conversations with us, no matter how difficult they are. Wherever they are, we want to do that. There are no no-go areas in Northern Ireland. There are none. I want to make that very, very clear. We will go anywhere, anytime to talk to anybody, and we will support people's right to do that. Let's be really clear about that. And I think what we need to do, though, is quietly and privately work with groups to give them the reassurance that when these events are going to occur, that firstly, they will be physically safe, that without massive policing operations necessarily, people will be physically safe, but also that when they return to their communities, that we will respond in the system and be visible and accessible. So there's a bigger debate about people's sense of security in the community, and we want to enter in with that. We're starting to enter advanced stages with the board about the public consultation of policing and the response to that, the visibility of police officers and how that can be improved. And I think it's a very important next step. But I hope that the event, Derry, happens again. But I understand why people are worried about it. Threats are easy to make to people, and there's kind of a currency and intimidation in Northern Ireland that's gone for many years. And this needs to stop, and this is just another throw of that. But it's nowhere near as strong as it was, and I'm confident that, with time and with effort from all community and all politicians, we'll move through this.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, the Resources Committee have been considering the issue of overtime, and we learned that indeed there are individual officers who have earned in a year in excess of £50,000 in overtime earnings alone. Can you reassure us about the reliance of the PSNI on overtime and whether it's within acceptable limits? And also, how are you safeguarding the well-being of individual officers?
Thank you, Wendy. Yes, overtime usage is high, but it's 30% lower than it was 4 years ago. We have made some progress. There is more progress still to be made, and whilst we've seen an overall reduction, there will always be the outlier and the exception to the rule of people or small groups of people who are required to work many extra hours, and of course that says something about use of public money, but you're right also to draw out the well-being issue and the impact that that has on the health and the well-being of officers who are expected to work those long hours. So we're open to the challenge from the Resources Committee. Mark Hamilton and Mark McNaughton co-chair the Overtime Steering Group, which has just actually been refreshing in terms of reference. And maybe ask one or both of the Marks to comment on the work of that group and provide you with some reassurance that we're taking this seriously.
Yeah, so thanks, Wendy. We did have a good conversation about this at the committee, and I think it was a good timely reminder to us. So our overtime breaks into two categories: main grant and additional security funding. When you look at the main grant element of it, our overtime profile is pretty much similar to our most similar forces. It represents about 3.4% of someone's wages. It's the additional security piece, which is a higher proportion of overtime, where the averages then go up, and that obviously relates to our ongoing situation in Northern Ireland. That said, as the Chief said, we reduced by 30%. We were overspent in the budget last year, so we've set some immediate targets for the year coming, which staying within budget. We're revising the overtime steering working groups in terms of reference, but we're also making a clear strategy about more activity around overtime reduction, officer welfare. Trigger points for officers who reach certain levels, and some departments do that. We have some departments in the minute who when officers reach certain levels, they're brought in and there's a discussion about their welfare and overtime working, but it's quite narrow to certain branches, so we now need that consistent approach across the entirety of the organisation. And Yvonne, on the left, through the Employee Engagement and Welfare Group, has also raised this as an issue around welfare, physical health and mental health. So we're going to come back to you very soon on this issue. I think it's a timely reminder, but I would reinforce the fact that we are far less resilient over time than we were. But there is also an overlying cultural issue that we discussed even again this morning about how we view overtime and how we use it. And I will be coming back to the board very soon with some updates on that.
Do you need to add anything, Martin?
No.
Thank you.
Just as a supplementary, I was the briefing, as you know, Mark, and it was very comprehensive, but I just want to dig down a wee bit into this to see, from the FOIs, it was 3 or 4 officers, I think, who were earning as just in overtime, something like 55,000 and down to 50,000 and more to go after that. And I just find it really difficult to understand how they can do it. I mean, just be very frank, and I haven't looked them out, so the only people in PSNI who get overtime are either constables or sergeants. So it's at the low end of earnings, and yet, and I presume they don't, if I get it wrong, I presume they don't earn that money on their basic wage. That's what I mean, has anybody, and this is not just 1 year, because we had an FOI for another year, which was in the mid to high 40,000s. I don't know if it's the same people or whatever. I just find it quite difficult to understand, and the question about, as Wendy asked about welfare, is very important as well. You know, if they're doing huge amounts of overtime, then how does that sit for their welfare? I mean, do they get spoken to, and do they get spoken to by someone outside of those who actually agree, who say, I agree with you overtime? So I presume somebody signs off on all of this, but is it someone outside that doesn't?
Yes, so some departments are better at that than others. They do get spoken to. The high earners are primarily in some of the specialised departments who are working very, very long hours on specialist operations, and maybe end up working on nearly every day off that they have in a month. Some of these units also are understaffed against their establishment level, therefore overtime can be used then to make up for the headcount, because you can't make up with somebody who hasn't got the specialist skills to fill that post. So there's a number of factors, Gerry, that lead to overtime being used. And there is also then the responsibility upon us about people's welfare and how much time they're working. So what we've had a discussion about last week and recognised is that there are good bits of practice going on in parts of the organisation, but there's no consistency. And I've tasked the work to go and look specifically at the top earners, specifically at the welfare issues, specifically whether there should be a cap on earning, there should be a cap on hours served, the authorisation points for those issues, and then the interdependence between that and our HR plan about the availability of people in certain units and their sickness and their welfare. So I'm going to give you all the answers today. The work has been commissioned. They're valid questions. I think they're fair questions, and I hope to come back to you with answers. I do want to reassure the board, though, that overtime is not just issued willy-nilly in the organisation without any oversight. There is lots of oversight of it. It has to be pre-detailed. If it's not pre-detailed, it has to be authorised by at least a regular inspector. There are checks made by our finance branch against the overtime that is profiled and the overtime that is worked. There is a list every month of the top earners, so we know who they are. But what the board has challenged me to do is to have more forensic detail on that and the challenges around what we're doing about it. So that's what we'll come back to you with.
I wanted to ask a question, Chief. Be aware that there was a judgment recently, I think it was called the McQuillan Judgement. It was in the High Court. And basically, and forgive me if I get this entirely wrong, but in layperson's terms, but it was about a case of a woman who was killed in 1972 in Belfast. And it centred around whether the LIB, the Legacy Investigative Branch of the PSNI, were Article 2 compliant in terms of being able to investigate that case. And as I understand it, the judgment came out saying that they were not Article 2 compliant, at least in one aspect of it, if I remember correctly. So the question is, what implications does that have? Is it to be appealed by the PSNI, or is it just that you have to deal with the implications of it?
Well, this was if we were to appeal this, it would be to the Supreme Court, because this was actually Ms. McQuillan, who was the sister of the deceased Jude Smith, appealing a previous case that had gone in our favour, where we were declared to be independent or Article 2 compliant, or that Article 2 did not apply because of the age of the case. So this is part of a process where judges are differing in their view. I haven't made a decision yet about whether or not to appeal. Well, having read the judgment, it is clear that there's a strong rationale in relation to this specific case and to the murder of Jude Smith, a young woman who died by a gunshot wound on Falls Road in 1972. So there's a number of things and observations that the court have made in this case that we will want to follow through on and satisfy. The judgment did find it was largely around independence. The hearing, we were found to be institutionally independent, hierarchically independent, but not practically independent. And practical independent, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding from the judgment is that that's largely got to do with the level of confidence that the family have in PSNI, rather than the sort of more technical pieces of independence that come with hierarchical and institutional independence. So this is all very technical. We want to bring an investigation, a resolution to this family. We want to respect the court. We haven't yet made a decision about appealing, but If we appeal, it will be on the basis that the judgment lacks clarity, in our view, on the repercussiveness of this judgment in the current day investigations. So we don't really have an argument about, from a PSNI perspective, other parts of government or whatever may have a different view, but that's for them to talk to. We don't really have a strong argument around the specifics as it relates to the murder of Jean Smith. We do have concerns, and we're trying to work out how we get the judicial clarity that does not bind us into this independence argument on current day issues. And from my point of view, that seems a perfectly reasonable and responsible position for me to take as the Chief Constable of PSNI in 2019. So, for example, if somebody was at trial for a terrorist-related offence at the moment, in relation to something that's happened in the recent past, I'm talking about in the last year or two, could they say that they have this perception of a lack of independence because 18% of the PSNI also served in the RUC or whatever? So we're working through with lawyers the points and the implications of this case on current day policing, and I haven't made a decision yet about appeal. I want to take further advice. It'll not be a cold, legal, technical decision. It will take account of the public confidence issues and of the impression that we create with victims and with families. But I'm trying to be as open as I can without compromising or fettering our ability to do the right thing, because an appeal to the Supreme Court to get judicial clarity on these repercussiveness points is something that is under consideration, but we've asked the lawyers to look at other options for achieving that outcome.
Thanks a lot, let me send that later. And of course, I think most people look upon the issue of legacy and legacy investigations as different to current policing. And is there a time frame to us? Is there a time frame, or at least a rough time frame on this? Because this certainly, this will have an impact on all legacy cases. The fact that she will point out herself, and I agree with you that the structures have not been set up politically yet either, but it eats its way into that whole process if a decision isn't made fairly rapidly as to at least what is going to be done. And that is outside of the fact that we do have Margaret McQuillan, who was the lady who took the case, and her family. So there is an urgency, I would argue with you, there is an urgency on this to make some sort of decision and get the clarity, if clarity is what's needed.
Well, I agree with you, both for Margaret McQuillan and her family, but also around the rules of how these things operate. It's 28 days from the time that the judgment's issued that we would have to lodge an appeal with the Supreme Court. So I'm not sure exactly of timings, but we're probably close to halfway through that. And so I would imagine that we will need to finalise our advices from the QCs and consider the community impact and the public confidence issues and come to a judgment probably within the next week or so. And we'll not be doing that lightly. I've tried to be as open as I can without jeopardising or compromising our own position. We have sympathy for the McQuillan Smith family, but also have a responsibility to make sure that I don't disable ourselves from investigating current day cases, and that's my worry in all of this.
Thank you, Chief Constable, for that answer. And obviously, given the fact that the judgment found that PSNI was neither hierarchically or institutionally connected to the RUC, but did lay down recommendations on the practical independence of the legacy branch, as you stated. What assurance can you give us today that the judgment or your response to the judgment, whatever that may be, will not prevent the skills and the expertise of former RUC officers in the force being used in historical investigations? Because recently we've had a lot of complaints about previous other investigations, and it just transpired that the person who brought the best insight into the issue was a former member of the RUC. And can you give an assurance, Chief Constable, that we are not in the business of airbrushing the history and those who were former members of the RUC out of the PSNI for any reason or any purpose?
Well, let me be very clear. You know, I don't have any bias, prejudice, or agenda against former RUC officers. Haven't been one myself, but I also want to build confidence in policing, and we did have one of the many reports into our handling of legacy was done by HMIC in 2013. Revisited in 2015, and the stimulus for that was work done by Professor Lundy a few years before that into the independence issue, and a whole series of recommendations come out. So nobody's saying it's as binary as if you were former RUC, you can't do this or you can't do that, but there is now a process that we go through on all cases to check that there is no potential conflict of interest. And that does not mean that just because you're a former RUC officer that you can't investigate anything that happened before 1998. But it's quite an intrusive process around family connections and incidents and where you served and things you might have been involved in and all of that to make sure that there is that practical independence. And that was just one recommendation of the HMIC reports. So we'll not be airbrushing anybody or moving to a sort of, I don't know, a pejorative or a jumping to conclusions around people simply because of their background. But we will, I think, be pragmatic around making sure that we don't create circumstances that raises concerns for people about who may be looking into the case of their loved one.
Can you also give that assurance piece in relation to other investigations, that the skill and expertise and this corporate memory, because let's remember the RUC was decimated, completely decimated by PAM, and we had millions of hours of corporate memory that was lost, and now we're asking the police to remember every detail, every issue. And there are those who use all of those as means of not supporting the police, but of actually trying to make it more difficult for the police. That's my concern, that we want to make sure, yes, I take the point in relation to conflict of interest, and that's entirely appropriate, but it has to be in the context of respecting the fact that there are many, many people who served in the RUC, gave invaluable service, and still to this day have a corporate memory that is very helpful to ensuring that people are brought to book for things that were done wrong.
Well, I don't disagree with that statement. I just think it is important that there's pragmatic safeguards in place to make sure that any potential conflict of interest is dealt with in a way that's not offensive to the officer involved and secures the confidence of the families or the victims.
Thank you. Chief Constable, over recent months and indeed just again last weekend, people dressed in military style clothing have been play acting while carrying what I presume are imitation rifles during Brexit protests. Are these rather irresponsible and perhaps even dangerous acts informed to the police in advance, and are any breaches of the law being committed by such actions?
Thank you. Well, the most recent of these displays was the weekend just past, I think. And Tim Myers was the duty ACC and responsible for the policing of it. So rather than me second guess him, I'll get him to explain his own actions and approach it.
Thank you, Alan. So there are a range of offences that can be committed in the public order setting, and those include obviously where firearms are involved, possession of those firearms, or where they're not live firearms, if they're used to intimidate or threaten other people who might believe that they are, that's an offence. And then there are also offences under the Terrorism Act around displaying items that may be linked to a prescribed organisation. When we are planning operations to facilitate lawful protest, which is a critical part of our obligations, we will engage at a very early stage with organisers, as we did last weekend. And what we see all across Northern Ireland over many years is that a range of groups from both communities at times will wish to undertake commemorative or public display type acts that involve the carrying of imitation weapons for the purposes of commemoration and other factors, not direct intimidation or threat. And where that has been the case in the past, and as it was at the weekend, there is early engagement between police and organisers. Police are allowed to examine and inspect those items and satisfy themselves that those are actually imitation items, and then the procession or the event is allowed to continue. During that, as was at the weekend, we will gather evidence, we will continue to monitor and review, and where we feel that there is a potential for an offence, we'll communicate that to organisers, or where indeed we feel an offence has been committed, then we'll ensure that that is followed up. So as at the weekend, we had a criminal justice, a detective inspector who's in charge of our criminal justice strategy. Their job is to work with the bronze commanders, who are our commanders on the ground, and the silver commanders in the control room, to ensure that we capture evidence and manage to create, if we have to carry out prosecutions, that we're able to do that. But as was the case at the weekend, we were satisfied at all stages during that investigation that no offences were being committed.
Thank you.
Chief Constable, if I could, excuse me, return to wider and current community issues. It was reported around the end of March that in a period of 5 years, up to and including 2018, in Belfast alone, there were 320 attacks, reported attacks on the Muslim community. Now, given the acceptance that many of these crimes are not reported, we could probably double the number of incidents, and therefore they'd be presented with a much higher ratio of such attacks. Can I ask you, in light of this background information, what frameworks are in place to protect the community, the wider community, against such crimes, and also what additional measures can be taken, if necessary, to try and safeguard those communities, reassure those communities? And I'm asking that question, as you point out, very much mindful of the fact that this board might have a role to play, and PCSPs right across this country might also have a role to play.
Very good question. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask Mark Hamilton to lead on, and not only does he have the responsibility for this within PSNI, he's actually the UK lead in policing terms on hate crime. So in some ways we get double the expertise here. He has the local responsibility and accountability for it, and then tries to lead and coordinate the efforts across the UK. So Mark.
Yeah, thanks Chief, thanks John. The hate crime figures are always difficult to interpret because there is such massive underreporting, and then also there is a connection between how you report it and the fact that the definition in the UK is the most liberal definition for hate crime on the planet. Therefore, our figures are always seen to be high when people look at us wherever we are in the UK, but actually proportionately we don't think they're any particularly higher than any other part of the world. However, what we do see and have seen at certain times of the year are very clear spikes. These usually follow international or local incidents, which then translate into anti-Muslim hate crime, and we have seen various things, particularly after the terrorist attacks in other parts of the UK, and we see spikes around these times. And we're at the minute we're looking very carefully at everything post New Zealand. So there's daily reporting of hate crime now across the whole of the UK. We're monitoring this on a daily basis. So the hate crime figures in Northern Ireland have been going down, they're now going back up, which to me is in line with where they should be. Although the religion figures over the last 12 months have gone down. Although quite a lot of anti-Muslim hate crime is probably wrongly recorded as racist hate crime as opposed to religious hate crime. And racist hate crime up in the last 12 rolling months is up 77 crimes. I'm very happy that particularly in Northern Ireland that the local commanders have very good engagement with the Muslim community. And after every event, we task out additional engagement, additional reassurance, and where necessary, additional patrols, crime prevention advice, anything we can do to assist communities, and to do that. What is missing in Northern Ireland, for example, though, is, for example, the Home Office have now got monies to protect places of worship, which is available in England and Wales, not available here. This was previously used almost to protect a lot of synagogues around the UK. It wasn't the uptake around that around the Muslim community around the rest of the UK wasn't as great. But there's going to be another significant push now to get the Muslim community to make bids around that for places of worship. There's an additional piece around protection for community centres and places that aren't at worship, and the Home Office is carrying out some consultation on this at the minute, but that isn't present here in Northern Ireland. And there is something we can do about providing additional level of security response to places of worship, all places of worship of all religions, but particularly around the religions who feel vulnerable because particularly of international events. And I do think that that's a gap, John, here in Northern Ireland. I think it's something that we could talk about. Obviously, in the absence of an executive, there's no way we could fund it, or put it to an executive. But there is something there about providing additional measures alongside policing. Policing itself is part of the response, but there are ongoing issues about encouraging people to engage with policing, the confidence they have in policing, the visibility of the policing that they have, and people feeling that they don't want to draw attention to themselves. So there are more that we can do. The last thing I'd say, and it's really, really important, particularly as we move into as we're in kind of times of turmoil in our social space, is that the commentary publicly about any issues about race or religion or groups of people is really, really important. It's really, really important that people are very, very measured in what they say in response to any incident in the community, be it here locally or internationally. Very measured in what they say about people's faith and about their religion, because even if those are meant to be said in good faith, we know that the internet will take them and that will drive it toward the extremes. I'm sure you could comment on some of the stuff of extremism in the UK rising as well, the right wing, and our CT people are seeing a big increase in right wing extremism. So now is a time for calm heads, cool heads, lots of reassurance, lots of community togetherness, standing together with communities, particularly through times of instability, and really, really sensitive and nuanced commentary in the public space.
At last month's meeting, in response to a question on ATM thefts, I think you had said that the PSNI were making progress. Unfortunately, this week there were 2 additional incidents of ATM thefts using mechanical diggers, one in County Monaghan and one in my own constituency in a Hull. So I think that brings to a total of 15 in the last 6 months, which is working out 2.5 per month. So given that growing figure, which is quite substantial, there's a growing concern within the public at the rise of this, and also a growing concern about the lack of detection from the PSNI. So I mean, I'm just looking for maybe an update on the making progress from last month to this month, and also to ask, given that the disparity in the north and the south, is the PSNI working effectively on a cross-border basis with the Garda to detect this? And I mean, also if you could maybe alleviate whether it's one gang or 2 gangs or a number of gangs, and also is the PSNI got the required resources to identify who's responsible and catch these, because this kind of criminality is having a detrimental impact in the rural communities in which it's taking place.
So I'll just take that one, thank you. I just want to assure the board that without a shadow of a doubt, this is a priority for us right across policing, not only for Crime Operations Branch, but through all of our uniformed personnel as well. It is a priority. I have chaired and set up a goals group around this. We have worked closely with sections of the construction industry, with the business sector, and with wider communities, because we are fully aware of the impact that these crimes are having on local communities, and particularly in the rural communities that you refer to. We've got 3 strands within that investigative process, or in our overall response, and that is as regards the preventative actions that we can take with communities, with business, with construction sector. We've got the investigative strand, and again what our initial response is and looks like. Every single officer who is on duty and out there in uniform 24/7 is being briefed around this at the moment. To give you reassurance as well, I have been working, and my colleagues have been working closely with the An Garda Síochána through the Joint Agency Task Force. We've had meetings and planning at both strategic level and tactical level, and that shall continue as we go forward. There have been 2 arrests previously, but I think this is an opportunity also to follow on from the appeals that have already gone out to the public, that if at any time people see suspicious activity, please, please, please dial 999, tell us what they see, tell us where they see it, and we will respond.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask, I think compared to this time last year, there has been an increase in the number of murders in Northern Ireland, and I just wonder in terms of what that means for resource implications, as given that there's also a high level of resources for the McMahon and Dunbury inquiries, for example, but also whether or not there are any trends and patterns or characteristics around these murders that would require greater interagency or collaborative working.
Thank you. Well, one of the responsibilities that sits within our serious crime branch and sits under our head of serious crime is the major investigation teams and the investigation into murders and manslaughters. Since the 1st of January of this year, we have had 12 deaths. I think it's worthy to remind everyone here, because often individuals are somehow forgotten within the statistics. We've had the murder of Wayne Boylan, Ian Ogle, Patrick Ward, David Murphy, Giselle Marmon Herrera, Alison Marmon Herrera, her daughter, Alice Morrow, Reese Lehman. The deaths that we have already spoken about today, Morgan Bernard, Lauren Bullock, Conor Curry, Darren McGurk. And we have other active investigations that are ongoing, for example, the murder of Jim Donegan just before Christmas. So to date, 7 people have been charged for 5 of those murders. 2 of the murders that have happened in Newry, the sad deaths of Giselle and Alison Herrera, the suspect within that, we believe, has committed suicide. There are ongoing court proceedings for various other incidents that we have seen resulted in court of late. And then we have, as you refer to, the substantial scale of the inquiry into Greenvale, where currently we've identified approximately 830 witnesses. So all of that has a really significant impact on not only serious crime branch, but on our uniformed personnel and actually on our business capability and our forensic capability as well. So it is a full team effort by all accounts. We're satisfied at this time that every single victim, family member deserves equally as much attention to each of these investigations as everyone else. And I am content that we are resource-wise working towards criminal justice outcomes and developing and understanding the circumstances for each and every untimely death that people have led to. So resourcing has been a pressure. We have reached right across the organisation to support the teams, for example the investigative teams within the Greenvale inquiry. We have people from serious and organised crime, we have public protection officers there as well to ensure that specially trained officers are in place and dealing with any specific needs that may be required. So it probably feels, because of the frequency that there has been just in the last few months, that it is higher than other times, but I think the complexity of what we're dealing with, I think overall numbers is comparable, but I don't think this is a time to talk about statistics or just numbers. Yeah, you did ask just if there were any specific trends within this. There aren't actually, there are no specific trends. We have looked at motivations here that have been fueled by organised crime or paramilitaries. We have looked at domestic related motivations, and we're also aware of drug and alcohol related issues within all of this. But I'm absolutely confident that right across the organisation, as I said, across our serious crime branch, across our uniform branch, and across the vital role that the like of our forensics, our CSIs play within this, everyone is fully committed to finding out the circumstances that have led to each and every one of these deaths.
Can I just say, Chair, I find that reassuring, and I'm grateful for the Assistant Chief Constable's overview, but I don't think the board could finish today without asking, and I know Mr. James had expected, he raised it earlier, about Lisa Dorrian and any hope of closure for her family in the search for her remains, and could we have an update on that?
Well, as we speak, the operation and investigation into the circumstances of Lisa Dorrian's death, we know it's being treated as murder, it is ongoing. And I think it would be wrong of me to be able to, or to give any form of detail around that at this time, because searches are continuing as we speak. But I think if I can give any assurances to the board, to the wider community and families, it is a number of years since Lisa Dorrian was murdered, since she lost her life, and we will be relentless in seeking to find out what the causes and circumstances and who is responsible for that murder and others is.
Thank you very much. That concludes the business for today. Just want to say thank you to the Chief Constable, to the Director General of Operations from NCA, and all the colleagues for coming along, and even those who didn't contribute to get here. We will not be holding a May board because of the local government elections.